2 rabbit-like new front teeth with jagged edges, rosebud breasts, black rainforest dirt rubbed deep into her elbows and knees. In the classroom, nervous tears had streaked her face twice that year, and she struggled with multiplication. But this wild love is the way of young girls. We fought each other for primacy. We pushed in the line outside the chapel to share a pew with Graciela. We crowded her in the playground at lunch, offering her tastes of candy we had stolen to impress her. We took turns braiding her long, sticky hair. We routinely followed her home deep into the forest, and once we nearly fought a stranger in her name. We first saw the strange man one afternoon when we were pursuing Graciela down the path she took home from the schoolhouse. The man wore slick black shoes and a curl that fell over his forehead. He could be from nowhere but the capital. The man was following Graciela, just like us, but more rapidly. Graciela knew that we followed her home. She was never surprised when she arrived home and we fell from behind ferns and vines to greet her. But when Graciela noticed the strange man, she began to run. We followed, racing through the trees, and we saw Graciela run to her shack and shut the door behind her. The plants snaking across the shack's tin roof rattled their tendrils. The strange man from the capital wasn't far, and we watched sweat soak through his linen shirt. We threw rocks onto the path, not to hit him, but so he knew we were hidden in the trees, watching him as he approached the shack. He did not slow, and the rocks made puffs of dirt rise up around his feet. From the dense green, we dared him to turn around under our breaths. It was autumn, and the monarch butterflies, resting in our village for a few days on their way farther south, glinted from the vines, making a golden wall of eyes. The man called to her by a full name we had never before heard, Graciela de los Ángeles Mendez y La Rosa. Lourdes doesn't remember the part that comes next, but she never remembers anything. In a breath, the monarchs began to lift from their vines. They slowed the opening and closing of their wings as if listening closely to the name. The strange man pounded on the door of Graciela's house, screaming the name again until a vein bulged in his neck. From the forest, we watched him and emptied our pockets of rocks. He spat into the dust and pounded again, harder this time. We looked to each other. Should we scream, beat him with our fists? We were children, scrawny fools. The man glanced over to where we were hidden in the trees and spat into the dust again. We began counting to 5. 1, and we made fists. 2, and we crept forward with the green on our haunches, surrounding the strange man in a half moon. 3, and we looked to each other and decided with our eyes that we were prepared to hit him with our fists and kick him hard, that we would gather tight around him and he would fall beneath our bodies. We were certain our plan would work. And then the sky darkened, too fast to be clouds. So we looked up. 4, the butterflies carried themselves to the house where Graciela and her mother lived. At first, they landed gently on the window frames, the door, the roof, the walls, and hovered over the man's body. And then, with their multitude's force, like falling water, they poured over the house and the strange man. Earlier that week in school, Sister Infanta had shown us a picture of a North American beekeeper covered by a thick, crawling swarm, each tiny leg tapping like a clock's gears. And we watched the man cough and sputter without the beekeeper's veil to protect him from the butterfly's furry legs. The butterflies darkened the strange man with their gathered weight, and the sound, we remember the sound as a trapped bird, flapping without control, too close to the ear. No! Now we pause and look at Lourdes. Her arms are crossed, pressing against the heavy breasts that should have nursed 7 babies. Lourdes is still so stubborn and straw-haired, always shouting. She never agrees to this part of the story the way we tell it. Let us explain. We've heard her tell it over the years, and it's not much different. But there were some years when she changed the story all the time. Oh, please, come on. Las maripositas de Dios, por favor. She stands up and brushes at the bottoms of her feet before slipping them into her sandals as if preparing to leave the bench where we sit. We must be careful to remind her gently. Lourdes, lo pasó. How do you expect anyone to believe this nonsense, she says. Lourdes, you were with us, we say. Besides, how do you expect anyone to believe us if you keep changing the story? Why are you always like this? We say, let us continue, please. Fine, she says, rolling her ancient yellow eyes. Go on. We continue. 5. And the house was cloaked in translucent wings, glinting soft orange and black, opening and closing like light cast on mirrors. They rose and fell in ocean waves from the walls, lining themselves up in a dazzling choreography, never revealing the door, even as they crested and retreated. A dozen fluttered into each eye in making pairs, and he beat them anyway. But they danced over his fingers. 40 or so took turns gliding down to tickle his nose with gossamer wings. But that never happened, Lourdes interrupts again. Lourdes, enough, we say. She always does this, we say. It's not that Lourdes has forgotten. She knows what really happened. She's told the story our way before. In some of Lourdes' wildest versions, the butterflies are crows carrying rocks. Sometimes a white jaguar comes down from the volcano. Our red-eyed, pale-furred twin cadenas howl the capital man away. And sometimes our semicircle of fists drives him off. We bear with her delusions. The telling of this story depends on Lourdes' mood. The massacre was 9 years after the strange man appeared, and we always agree on that. It happened, we say. Cora remembers too, and Lucia. We nod, laugh, fanning the mosquitoes from each other's necks as though we share one skin. How else did she get away, Lourdes, we ask. Tell us that, Oh yeah, what do you remember, we say, taking turns to ask the same questions of Lourdes that we've been asking for nearly 100 years. We wait for Lourdes to turn her wide shoulders back around to us, the tail of her long silver braid hanging down her back like a stick broom. And then a long pause as Lourdes turns squarely and sits back down and takes a drink of pitaya from the sweating glass bottle. The juice leaves a fuchsia mustache above her lip. "Ay, you are impossible," she says. "So fanciful." Where were we? The strange man from the capital screamed words our mothers had told us never to speak, and then ran off. We watched the sweat shaking off his body, and slowly, slowly, the air filled with light again as the butterflies, moving in darkening streaks through the air, returned to their vines. Graciela ran to us, and together we watched the figure of the man until it became small and dark, a moving shadow. Maybe a week later, Graciela's mother, Socorrito, knocked on the door of Lourdes and Maria's house, and Rosario, who had just arrived home from the same field Socorrito had left, came to the window and invited Socorrito inside. Rosario offered Graciela's mother the cigarette she had rolled behind her ear, but Socorrito shook her head no. Lourdes and Maria watched from the stove as the mothers talked. Finally, Socorrito called Lourdes over to her, and then Socorrito put her arm around Lourdes' shoulder and nodded to Rosario, and she stepped outside of the house with Lourdes. Lourdes shrugged her shoulders and winked at Maria, who waited by the stove, watching out the window. Outside the dirt-packed shack, birds moved across the sky and filled the ceiba's tree branches with their colorful weight, and all the workers in our mountains knew the day was over and they could walk home. "Read this to me," said Socorrito, handing Lourdes an envelope that was torn around its edges. Those gringa nuns had the locura to teach us volcano daughters to read, but rarely did our mothers call attention to that fact by asking us to read something for them. And for a moment, Lourdes wondered why Socorrito hadn't just asked her daughter to read whatever was inside the torn envelope that was now inside her small, dirty hands. But Lourdes opened the torn envelope and pulled out a thick yellow rectangle of paper and read, "Mendez dead. We bless and remember his name. Send daughter Graciela de Los Angeles to estate, Colonia Escolar, the capital."